The Lumix GH3 is Panasonic's first shot at a professional mirrorless camera designed to replace DSLRs for a pro people shooter, right? Portraits, weddings, seniors, commercial people shots. And guess what? They knocked it out of the park. Yeah, I'm a believer. I've converted just about all of my DSLR work into mirrorless, and the GH3 does get the volume of work that I create. Why? Well, the fact that it's smaller, lighter, easier to move around, lots easier to learn, of course, is obvious. But the part that most photographers overlook are what I call the GH3's super features. Yeah. The eye dynamic range function, for instance, allows me to do shots like you're looking at right now. This is a fall sunny day in central Illinois, and you're able to see the highlight and the shadow detail. Sure, there's a little burn down there in the direct sun, but take a look at this shot with no post-processing. And that's the key. We want to be able to find a way to set up our camera so that we can reduce or eliminate post-processing, particularly when it comes to video, right? I don't know about you, but I'm rather picky about my video quality, and I don't want to spend hours in post with any sort of repairs or grading. So I rely on the super features for the GH3 to get me through the job. And in fact, we've got multiple GH3s that we shoot lots of projects on. In this video, you're going to see the handful of super features and how I use them and put them together to move a GH3 much further than most photographers do. You know why? I was incredibly fortunate enough to be one of the photographers that helped Panasonic test that GH3, and I did have a little bit of input. I don't think I had a whole lot, to be honest with you, but I've been using it and using it professionally under all kinds of different circumstances more than maybe anybody else. We've got all the lenses, we've got all the accessories. In fact, I use a lot of non-Panasonic accessories, and I'll show you exactly how my rig works. Which super features are we going to touch on in this video? The HDMI port, or more specifically, the mini HDMI port. You know, it allows you to replace, most of the time, your flash meter, your light meter, your spot meter, and your color meter for shooting high-end studio work. Sure, I'm going to plug that right into a television that's properly calibrated, of course, and I'll see exactly my pinpoint focus. I'll see all my color, my lighting, my exposure perfectly on a screen. Great, right? What about on location? You'll see me using a GH3 with that HDMI port, mini HDMI port, connected to a small HD monitor. This is going to take me out into the field and allow me to get that great image quality everywhere I go. And one of the last super features we'll talk about in this video is the navigation of the controls. How you're going to navigate through your camera's setup procedure using two hands. Because of the terrific touchscreen on the back of the GH3, you're going to be able to use your left thumb to navigate and select features on the screen, while your right hand is able to adjust the knobs and dials. That is huge. And it's one of the reasons why I think the GH3 could be the best hybrid photographer's camera you can buy. This segment is shot with the GH3s in portrait mode and 0 contrast boost, 0 sharpness boost, and +1 on color. Eye dynamic is high on the one that I'm talking into now. The one that you see here that will do the cutaways, it is on the standard setting. Eye resolution, shut off on all. White balance is set to adjustable K because, remember, our room here, we're very spoiled. This is all color control lighting. So Louis was just walking around here with a color meter, making sure all the color was perfect. So it better look terrific, right? All right, I get lots of people when they see GH3 in a typical setup where I'm using it, right? They want to know, all right, well, what pieces do you really use and how do you set it up? There is no one perfect way to set up any camera. So I'm just going to show you my techniques. And if those don't fit into your way of doing things, it's okay. Go ahead and change them around. I've got the battery grip, the BG on the bottom, also called the vertical grip. Got a GH3, and on it is the 7 to 14 millimeter zoom, which is one of the masterpiece lenses in the line here. So if you've never had a chance to play with that, please do. I know it's frightfully expensive. Okay, my basic setup, right? Let's start with the camera off. And the first thing we do in the world of Crockett is we buy only good SD cards. I'm a little particular to SanDisk, even though I'm a little harsh critically on them because they lie about their sustained data transfer speeds, but we have great luck with them. We're going to insert the card, close up the door, fire up the camera, right? All this is going to be done with your tactile senses more than it is looking and pointing and feeling. After a while, you'll realize the layout of the GH3 is made for you to use two hands. We'll talk about why we're going to use that touchscreen so well. It's made to do that, and I'll show you exactly how we do it, right? First up is we always format cards. I'm going to hit the menu button. That's going to take me to the setup menu. I'm going to go to format, and then if you watch how I do it, that's where I'm going to switch over to the touchscreen. It asks me to confirm. I'm going to use my other thumb, say yes, and then there we are. That is now ready to go because we change camera bodies here. We've got a bunch of GH3s, a bunch of GH2s, we've got a bunch of Fuji cameras. We use the same card. So the rule is in the world of Crockett that when you pick up one of the cards from the editing desk and if it's on a certain little place, that means they're ready to be reused. The first thing we do is we format, erase everything on there, right? That eliminates reduces any sort of problems. Next, the mechanicals up on the back of the camera. Decide what you want. Let's say, for instance, I'm going to shoot in aperture priority mode, which is very common for me. I'm going to then set my autofocus. Do I want autofocus single, continuous, or manual? Just for this instance, let's go manual, okay? And you'll see I have my display set up on the back screen there, and you can adjust that by hitting the display button. If you want less information, that's cool. If you want more information, that's great. This is all customizable, by the way, there too. Next, we're always talking about those film modes, right? Those color modes. So let's get to those. I'm going to hit the menu button. I'm going to go left arrow to go to my menu select. I'm going to go up to the camera picture, which is actually the recording menu. That's the official word for it. Then I'm going to scoot on down and let's take a look at some of the info that's in here, right? The digital zoom, I'm going to turn off. I'm not a big fan of that feature. Color space, this is an sRGB universe. There are times we have to use Adobe RGB, but if you're using Adobe RGB because some moron on the internet said that it gives you a bigger box of crayons, tell them they're an idiot and there aren't any printers that you're going to have access to that are going to print Adobe RGB. Now, I have them here. Those big inkjet printers, great. If you're serious about inkjet printing, you can shoot in Adobe RGB, but use sRGB because pretty much all monitors are sRGB. And guess what? Video. It's about as close to sRGB as a person can get. So sRGB solves a lot of color problems. Next, the facial recognition. Now that's one of the more advanced features on the GH3. That's going to allow you to set up the ability for the camera to recognize a specific person. If I decide I want to turn this on, I can take 3 pictures in a row of one person and it'll ask me if I want to register that person. And if I do, I can enter in their name or I can give them a ranking. That means when this camera is working, it's going to give priority to a person that it recognizes. If you're a wedding shooter, you can put in the bride and groom, the mother of the bride, the mother of the groom. You can put those in as face recognition. And anytime that camera sees that person in the frame, it's going to want to autofocus, proper color, proper white balance on that person, gives them priority. That is a crazy great feature for the power users that want to get into event photography. Great stuff. I don't need it right here. You could if you certainly wanted to. If you want to set up your own profile, you can do that as well. More importantly, we want to get to the photo style menu. Now, it's up to you which way you want to go. Do you want to just use the left and right wheel? You certainly can. You can rotate the wheel if you want to, but I'll typically use the right arrow here. That gets me into my selection. See it up on top there? Now, I can use the touchscreen if I want to and take it over to natural, right? Monochrome. You need to experiment with these to find out which ones you like. Scenery. Portrait is what we're going to shoot in here today. Then you hear me talking about how we're going to adjust color and contrast. Here's how. We're going to hit the down button. There's your contrast, plus or minus. There's your sharpness, plus or minus. And this is going to be plus or minus 5, which really equates to about 50%. When you go max sharpness, it's not doubling the amount of sharpening. It's adding about 50%, right? That's, I think, why it says plus 5. That's not an official Panasonic reference, by the way. Then, of course, the color saturation, and we do use this a lot. So on the cameras that we're working at here, we're going to crank that up +2. Noise reduction, we really don't mess with noise reduction. Now, if you're doing something unusual, you may want to start experimenting with that. But the noise reduction is an extremely complicated set of automated filters inside the GH3. So use them with care, right? Now, when you're done here, we're just going to tap and hit the set button. See that? That saves those settings. And when I go back, they'll still be there, right? There's my +2 on the color. I'm going to go ahead and hit set, and that'll stay there until you undo it or if you do a factory reset. Next, aspect ratio. I work in 16:9 all the time. If you don't want to and you want to go square, 1:1, that's where you're going. You want to go 3:2, 4:3, it's totally up to you. We're going to work in 16:9 because our video, our HD video, is 16:9. And in fact, I'm very comfortable with 16:9. Picture size. Now, this is for the photo recording. We'll come back to the video recording. This is just when you hit the shutter button to take a photo. Do you want large, meaning using 12 megapixels, medium, using 6 megapixels, or small, using 2 megapixels? We pretty much leave it in the large size all the time. There are certain examples when we kick it down to medium, but not typically. Quality. Now, here you go. This is up to you. You probably know I'm not a RAW shooter. For me, the work I do, RAW takes up too much time and there's no advantage for it. Now, if you're into RAW, that's terrific. You will find out that there are some features inside the GH3 like eye dynamic, the dynamic range adjustment, eye resolution, the automatic resolution adjustment. Those features, data is not accessible in a RAW converter. There is no eye dynamic slider in Photoshop or Capture One or Lightroom. So just so you know, there are features that are more accessible to the camera than they are to the external RAW processor. So some folks may say they could actually get a better JPEG than a RAW. Whatever. I'm going to use the fine compression. That's the top one there. And if you wanted to, you can shoot RAW or RAW plus JPEG in whichever compression value you like. So I'm going with the fine quality. Metering mode, though, once again, that's totally up to you. I typically just use the top one. I could use the other ones if I want to, but no need. The camera does a really good job. Burst rate, it's up to you how fast you want that burst rate. If you use the fastest burst rates, you'll see that the file size becomes smaller. Auto bracket, come on. You don't buy a professional camera to do auto bracket. That's from film. They just put that on there to make old guys like me that used to shoot film happy. We don't do auto bracket. Self-timer, totally up to you. Here's an important one, the eye dynamic, the dynamic range. And we'll come back a little later to what dynamic range is and how this works, because this is one of the reasons you buy this camera. You should be adjusting this menu item every time you set up this camera because you need to give this camera as much data as humanly possible to make it work, right? And to make it work well. Face detect, for instance. The face detect in the autofocus tells the autofocus to focus on a face. But did you know it also triggers the auto white balance system to also focus on that face? And when it has a white balance question, meaning the person has a very different color value of white balance on them versus the background, it will decide more for the face. Why? Because you told it you want to photograph a face. Face detection is suggesting to the camera, we need to get great pictures of faces. It goes globally through the entire system, and it's very smart. That's one of the things that you need to set up for your pre-processing with a smart camera like a Lumix GH3. So let's set it up for this shot, shall we? We're going to have high eye dynamic, which is going to allow us to record the most highlight detail and shadow detail possible. If we were to use eye dynamic in a low scene brightness, like this room, for instance, our highlights would appear muddy and our shadows would appear muddy. More on that later. We're going to set it in this instance to high dynamic range when we're looking at me because of all the lights that are in the shot. But when we're shooting the back of this camera, with this camera, it's not set to high dynamic range because we don't have a whole lot of highlights. All we've got is midtones and shadows on here. We don't need to have the extended highlight info. Don't get freaked out if that's confusing. We will help you. This one here, just for fun, I'm going to set it to standard. Eye resolution is a super strong series of internal processing filters that do things that no other cameras do. We'll come back and I'll give you more info on that. Don't use that unless you know what it is. Leave it off by default. There's a reason it's off by default. Next up, HDR, that's your high dynamic range. If you want to play with that, go right ahead. That's not something that I'm real interested in. Multiple exposure actually works very well on this camera. A little tricky. The time-lapse shot is terrific. If you love time-lapse and star trails, those kind of things, this is a great camera for that. that. The electronic shutter is off by default. We like to use the mechanical shutter in there. It's just more accurate, gives us a little more flexibility there too. Shutter delay, good luck if you want to play with that. I've never played with it. In fact, I'd like to tape that in the off position. If there was super glue you could pour in there to leave that permanently off, I would do it. Next, flash. We don't use the pop-up flash on this camera. You certainly could, I guess, if you wanted to, but we're not there. We use LED for everything. If not, we go to Q-Flash. Quantum Q-Flash actually is fully compatible. Their Trio line with on-camera as well as wireless TTL off-camera with all Lumix cameras, and they're terrific. That's Quantum Q-Flash. Red eye removal, come on, that's kids. ISO increments, it's up to you what you want. I like to set mine in 1/3 increments just because I want to be able to dial those in a little more in depth. The extended ISO, now that's totally up to you. I'm going to leave mine off. And I'm not going to use ISO 25,000 for anything. Some people say, oh, I can get really great shot with it. That's terrific. It's not up to my standards. The high ISO performance of this camera is tremendous, but not at ISO 7 gazillion or whatever it goes up to. Long shutter noise reduction. Again, if you're an outdoor nature shooter, that might be something you're interested in. The shading comp, that is going to help you when you have a lens that has dark corners, and it will sense that lens and help you with that. Good for you. The teleconverter, don't need. Digital zoom, of course, we're back to that. We're on off. Now, let's say we want to set up the motion picture, the video side. Now, you'll find out that when you set things like the photo style, say we go from monochrome to vivid, you're changing both the photo ability and the video ability. You cannot separate those two. That's one of the things I'd like to see in future editions of GH3s. I would like to have a GH3 that would allow me to set up to shoot full color video, but then when I go to photo, I want that to be black and white. I will show you a little bit later how I shoot in a hybrid style where I do flip that, but I do have to change one of the custom menus. We'll talk about that a little bit too. But you'll see up here when we get to motion picture, of course, we've got our photo style. When we change it here, we change it on the photo at the same way. That's automatic. It automatically changes. So remember, you cannot separate those photo styles. The recording mode, the couple ways for you to go. If you use AVC HD like our setup is, you will need to import the video. You'll have to pull out the card or connect the USB cable to your GH3, connect it to your AVC HD compatible software, which would be Final Cut Pro is what we use, Apple's iMovie, Windows Movie Maker. Those are all AVC happy, but don't use one of those wrapper utilities where you just drag the AVC HD file out, copy it to a drive, then put it into a wrapper utility in order to trick your editing software into thinking that it's an MOV file, because it's not. Instead, use the import, and you'll see the import window pop up, and you'll be able to bring in your AVC HD the way it should be. Remember, AVC HD is not one file on the camera. It's as many as 4 files on the camera. Those all combine into one only when you use the import, not drag and drop, when you use the import function on whatever camera you're going to use. So I choose AVC HD. If that's too much for you to deal with, don't sweat it. Just go to MOV, right? MOV. That's Apple's QuickTime's bulletproof stuff. All right, record quality. Well, it's up to you. Now, there's many ways to go. If you're into the whole cine look, right, the 24p, that means 24 pictures per second going through a video timeline. That's up to you. That's a very cinematic look. Personally, our standard is going to be 30 frames a second. So our frames per second are 30, and we use progressive, not interlaced. It's up to you. If you want to shoot 60p, that really is the best way to go. That's 60 pictures per second on your video stream. You've got progressive and you've got interlaced. P is just going to be a little sharper. Interlaced, it depends on what kind of system you're going to. It's up to you. Most people just going to use the P version, the progressive version. So I'm going to set mine to 30p and off we go. Next up, dynamic range, by the way. The iDynamic is also the same on video as it is photo. There's no way to separate it. So if I change this from standard to high, for instance, and when I go check on that in the photo menu, it will be high as well, right? Right on. Now, here's the technique that we talk about over and over again. You see that we've got the menu on, right? We want to get that menu off there so that we can start using some of the controls on the outside of the camera. We're going to do a light tap on the shutter button, and we're not going to go all the way down, right? The shutter button has its off position when there's no finger on it. It's got a halfway down when you're going halfway pressure. And then when you push all the way to release the shutter, then that's all the way down. When you go halfway down, that's called tapping out. And you want to tap out in order to change the menu. Let's review. If we happen to be in the menu item here and we want to adjust our ISO, for instance, well, we have a shortcut button on the camera that does that. In order to grab that, we're just going to tap out once on the shutter button and then tap the ISO button, and then look what you got. You've got the ability to adjust that by rotating the ring if you want to, or you can click on the ring left and right if you want to. You can use your thumb wheel if you want to too, and in fact you can even use the touchscreen if you feel like it. It's kind of a little uncomfortable to use the touchscreen for that, but you certainly can. Next up, quick menu. That's going to be right here. It's usually labeled function number 2. Depends on how you've set your custom functions, but this is the way to shoot here. When you're ready to go, if you have smaller fingers, and ladies seem to work really well with this, particularly if they have nice fingernails that don't seem to get in the way with this touchscreen, you can actually just tap on the screen like this and go to my picture mode and say I want to crank it up to vivid. You really can use the touchscreen. Now, I got huge thumbs, so for me to tap on that with a thumb, it works okay. Right there's my flash mode. Here's going to be my frame rate. There's my file size. This gets a little confusing. That's 16:9, large, medium, and small. Now I can cycle through that by hitting the left and right thumb wheel. I can also use my thumb wheel on the back of the camera to change a value. See it? That's changing my aperture right there. When I use the front index wheel, that changes the item. So there's 4 different ways for you to adjust items on the quick menu. You can touch, you can scroll through with the jog wheel, you can use the thumb wheel combo, and you can use any one of those that you want to. I know there are people that use my two-handed technique where they use the front indexed rotating wheel to select the item. Then they use their finger to tap in what they're going to do. Works well, right? Works well. Takes a little while to get used to, but you certainly can. Next up, you have to decide what other features that you want at your disposal, right? That's where the custom function comes in. This GH3, I have not messed with any of the custom function, but it's totally up to you what you want to do. You do need to get comfortable with the dials on the top of the camera. That's totally on you. On the left, you're going to see whatever function you want. If you want to do multiple exposures or single exposures or burst rates, terrific. You've got your mode dial, of course, your typical mode dial. We're going to use lots of those. Don't think that those, like the IA and the scene mode, that those are garbage. Those are not garbage. Those are good things. Then, of course, up on top, you've got your quick button for white balance. You got to love that. Look at that. You can zip right through that. You can finger touch it if you want to. You can do anything that you want. I love the fact of the full integration between the touchscreen and your right-hand controls. Next, I'm going to tap out and I'm ready to shoot. When I want to hit a photo, bam, I'm ready to go. If I want to hit video, I'm ready to go. I just press the button and I'm recording video. Gotta love that. Press it again to turn it off. This camera has the beep turned off. Now, typically in my studio, the guys that shoot production here for us, they like the beeper off. I like it on because a lot of times if I don't have my super sexy pink glasses with me, I can't quite tell if that little thing is on or recording or not recording. So I like the little beep because it makes a single beep when it engages video and it makes a double beep when it's done. So that's my quick setup for GH3. There's a couple other little things that I do, not a whole lot to be honest with you. I do change my autofocus modes from time to time in the middle of a shoot, but beyond that, we're all good. One last thing before I let you go on to the next segment. You'll notice we do have a second battery down in this vertical grip here. If you get a chance, hop into your menu, battery use priority. This is going to ask you to tell the camera, do you want it to drain the battery in the grip first or in the camera body first? It's up to you. If you think you may be separating that within the shoot, use the one in the body. But I'm going to tell you to use the grip, the BG, the battery grip, because if you're doing a long shoot, you can drain the battery on this bottom grip first. Then it'll automatically switch, and when it's flat, it'll automatically switch to the battery that's in the camera next. That allows you to pull the battery out and change it in the grip if you need to, or pull it out and put it on the charge. That means it's going to be grabbing up more juice for you and you will not miss a shot. That's the cool part about using 3 batteries and the vertical grip, the battery grip on the GH3. As long as you're good about managing how to recharge your batteries, you will never need any more batteries than that. There's no reason to buy 5 batteries. As long as you've got AC power, right? You've got some way to charge those back up. It will charge that battery back up much faster than you're going to use it. So no need for an AC adapter. The camera is actually very good when it comes to consuming energy. Video and autofocus do take the primary power from the battery, but the rest of the functions, you're good to go. In this segment, let's have a little fun. Let's flip it over to the creative mode, the art filter mode, whatever you want to call it. Let's choose the toy camera. This is one of my favorites. You'll notice that it's a little cross-process kind of looking, right? The colors aren't quite right. And that beautiful vignette that's actually put on the camera while we're recording. It works on photo as well as video, giving you pretty much identical video and photo quality. I mean, you can edit them together and not see a difference. You have a little bit of control over overall brightness. You have the ability to change the overall cast, be it warm or cool. I've got it one notch to the left on the warm side, it's a little late actually. I'm feeling a little tired here, but I want to get this done. So I figured, I'll put a little warmth in there. Well, let's use that kind of whimsical style here in order to make a statement about something that's kind of technical that is extremely important. One of the things that we need to deal with when it comes to deciding how we're going to dial our camera to make the best possible photographic recording, video recording as well, is managing our scene brightness and dynamic range. A lot of people get those confused, but don't be. Here's what it means. The opening shot where I'm outside and walking into the camera there on that beautiful fall day, the scene brightness there, if we were to take some tools and actually measure that, we'd use a tool like this Iconic spot meter. Actually, this is a zoom spot meter. This is going to allow us to measure the light that's reflecting off the highlight area, which would be the top of my head there, that has still the brightest highlight in the shot, that still has the detail that we're interested in keeping. Then we have to pick a spot that is the darkest area that still has detail that we want to keep. Now, this is a crucial decision. A photographer needs to decide where that scene brightness begins, right, with the highlights and ends with the dark values, because you might think you want to record everything, but you really don't. You don't want to have all the detail in the sky, for instance, up here. That would be, well, extremely difficult, but you could. That would give it that kind of HDR look, and you probably don't want that for everything. So what we need to do is we need to figure out how we're going to communicate to our camera. Hey, camera, how do you feel about recording a lot of highlight and a lot of shadow on this shot to give me lots of detail? And on the other hand, when you have a very gloomy day or you're inside in a very, very evenly lit spot, you don't have a very big scene brightness range there at all. Well, you're going to need to tell your camera to work in a smaller dynamic range to meet that. So scene brightness is the distance between highlight and shadow that you want detail in, measured in f-stops from the brightest to the darkest. That width is your scene brightness. Your job as a photographer is to decide how much of that scene brightness do I want to record by setting the camera's dynamic range. So dynamic range isn't really in the room here, that's scene brightness. And there is no scene brightness in my camera, that's dynamic range. Same thing, kind of really, but we use different words for that. Right, we've got to make photography difficult somehow, right? Well, if you notice that opening shot, we're out in the big fall there, right? Here's a screen grab from that. When we measure the values, we see that the area up in my hair there, Mr. Handsome's platinum hair, that we still have detail retention is f64 2/10. And down in the darkest shadow in the fence down here that we still have detail and we still want detail is f4 3/10. Well, that's a pretty big spread. We need to let the GH3 know that we're interested in recording as much of that as we possibly can, and there is a limit to it. So in that case, we're going to tell the camera, hey, do me a favor, work in the high dynamic range values and record as much of that sparkly highlight and as much of that deep shadow as possible. Well, when we fire up the dynamic range into high mode, and I've made a print of this here, when you look up here in the super edges of the leaves there, not the blown out sky, but right around that, look at how much detail we're able to hold in that. And how about these brightly reflected leaves? Wow, that's a ton of detail. Well, what about in the shadows? Let's go down into that fence. Look at that. That's a lot of detail. That's from having our dynamic range set to high. Well, what happens when we turn that to off? Well, on first glance, it looks like it's the same exposure, but there's actually a rather big difference in detail. Look at the highlight. Look at the shadows. They're kind of blocked up, aren't they? Well, let's compare the two. The high dynamic range and the low dynamic range, which actually is off. Well, the GH3 allows us not so much to set these concrete barriers of dynamic range and scene brightness control, but It's an auto dynamic range process. And it doesn't say, Will, don't tell me, it doesn't say, Will, tell me exactly how many f-stops you want me to convert into my dynamic range. No. It says, all right, how much do you want me to go? High, low, mid, off, right? You choose. This is one of the things that you need to make as part of your creative process setup. Now, when I was shooting Nikon cameras, we had something that was similar to this. It was called active D-lighting. And if you're coming out of Nikon, moving into GH3, don't think that these behave the same way. They certainly don't. The active D-lighting gave us a big headache when we were shooting, for instance, high-key shots, right? White background. We would have to make sure that the active D-lighting was turned off because it would throw our exposure all over the place. Doesn't seem to be the case with the GH3. Also, I don't know for sure, but I sense that once you turn on functions like face detect or face recognition, the camera does know that you're talking about making people portraits, and it will base its decisions on things like eye dynamic as well as eye resolution and auto white balance based on the face or the faces that it sees. So that's what we need to pay attention to, and I think eye dynamic is one of those tools that you should be setting every time you pick up that GH3 camera, because it'll make you better photos and better video, much better video. Segment, we've got the Lumix GH3s set to the standard mode, but we're going to tweak up that color saturation by giving it a +2 color. None of the contrast, none of the other tools will be set in that menu. However, when it comes to eye dynamic, we're going to high eye dynamic because we've got all these whites and blacks and everything in between. And because you want to snap me off the background a little bit, we're going to crank up our eye resolution to its standard setting. So beyond that, we're just shooting 30 frames per second, actually now in-house here, and ISO varies between 400 and 1600. Let's get cranking. The HDMI port is much more than a way to just take your pictures and plug them into a TV to look at how cool your photo and video are. This is a tool that we use every day in order to improve the quality of our images. Now, those of you that know my history know that I'm big into meters, both flash meters, exposure meters, and color meters. This is a color meter, and it measures the quality of light that we're going to be dealing with to make some pictures. You're also going to see some other unusual tools here. One is a small HD screen. It's one that we use outdoors as well as indoors. And behind me, I'll show you an even bigger screen. Now, what's the key point? Well, the HDMI port connects all those things together. Take a look at this shot that I'm doing here. Believe it or not, this really is a real client shoot. We need to shoot this camera on a white background from a really nice angle, and we want to make sure that part of the camera is sharp in focus, the other part of the camera is not quite sharp in focus, and the front edge of that lens is way out of focus. That's depth of field control. And that's one of those things that's much easier to do on a mirrorless camera with HDMI. Why? We can see all qualities of the image before they pop out. First quality is we've got to control color. I need to know when I look on screen that I see the color that I need, right? Well, I'm right in my color command central here. Behind you are color calibrated inkjet printers. Here are AZO color calibrated screens, right? The best of the best. This is a first class camera, first class lens, great screens, right? Well, I'm going to start off with the LED light that's up above here, and I happen to know that that LED light is very accurate. It's set for a color temperature of 5100K. I take my color meter, I can measure out here. Oh, what do you know? It's 5160, right? A softbox will change the color temperature of the light. Well, that means that I can easily set my adjustable white balance value on my GH3 to 51.5 or 51 or 52, depending on which way you like it, a little warm or a little cool. And I don't have any reason to post-process my color values, right? Remember, that's our goal. We want to shoot a camera in this studio, and we don't care what brand it is, that allows us to reduce our post-processing because we don't want to adjust exposure and color when it comes to not only photo, but video. We have to skip that. The GH3 does that better than any other camera we've ever used. Want to see how? Okay. You know how I've got my camera set up. It's adjustable K white balance set to 51. Then we don't have to mess with any of the rest of that stuff. You also know that we're going to be caring about where our focus is going to be and our exposure, right? We haven't talked about exposure. Let me show you how we do that. Well, behind me you'll notice there's a great big television, and that is a Panasonic plasma TV. Most people think that TVs aren't all that accurate. Well, hang on a second. When you use a Panasonic camera and a Panasonic TV, there is a little magic communication there. However, I could just as easily use a Samsung or a Sony television in order to do what I need to do. So I'm going to change the connection from the small HD monitor on the set here to that TV that's right behind me. First thing, I'm just going to unplug from the side of the camera. No need to turn the camera off. It doesn't care, by the way, if the power's on or power's off. You'll notice the camera's on. It takes a little while for it to spit the picture out to the back. I'm going to use an HDMI cable. This is a mini HDMI to standard HDMI back on the TV. Those are easily available in various lengths, and the GH3, particularly if you're going to a newer television, it will allow you to go through 30 feet of good quality HDMI cable. That means I can have a monitor here, a monitor there, a monitor wherever, and I can run a cable 30 feet away and get that. Now, this is not one of the functions that the Wi-Fi is going to be able to do really well for us. This is still a job for the HDMI port. Let me show you and take a look at how we calibrate that television. I'm going to take the remote control from my TV, you can see it back there, and let's pop into the menu. Best thing you can do on certainly one of the newer TVs is go to either the standard picture mode, or if you happen to have one that's sRGB, choose that one. That gives you the correct contrast, white point, and color saturation values, much better than standard would. And don't worry about if you're shooting in Adobe RGB space with your RAW files, because video is all sRGB, like it or not, huh? Next, the contrast and color and brightness on this television really don't need to be adjusted. These are the standard values here. So you'll notice when I put up a picture up on that screen, I'm getting white whites, black blacks. Color values are inside all my parameters. But how do I know for sure? Let me show you. I'm going to use my old friend, the color checker chart. This is a color checker passport, and I'm concerned with one of the rows of gray patches. The one I like best is probably this one here. I'm just going to fold this up. I'm going to put it under the lighting that my product is in. I'm going to scoot my camera over just a little bit, and I am going to refocus. Well, you'll see up on the screen that now I've got my color patches. I've also got my white to black patches. Now, if you want to take it a step further, you could actually take a photo of this right now, move it onto your computer, and on your calibrated monitor, you'll see exactly what you need. We happen to have our calibrated AZO monitors within the same angle of view as our television. So for us, we can shoot a picture, put it on the computer, pull it up on a perfectly calibrated AZO display, and then look at it and compare it against the television. And guess what? We find it's about 90% of the way accurate. A television is not the world's most accurate monitor screen, but it is the screen in which our customers are going to be viewing on. That means when we have an image that looks really good on this TV while we're shooting, after we edit and post-process, it's going to end up on a TV or a lesser screen, right? An iPad or an iPhone. It's going to look perfect. So I find out that it's much, much easier for me to do critical focus through that HDMI port on my camera when I can go up to a huge TV and look at it really big. Works perfectly. Talk about focus. Let me show you some more tips. To work with focus, I certainly want to use my screen again, but I don't want to be turning around, so I'm going to go back to the small HD monitor. And once again, don't worry about shutting your camera off. Watch, it'll catch back over there, so there you go. Now I'm going to work off this monitor. I'm able to move in here, and I'm able to adjust my focus. But you ever use the manual focus and find out it's not quite on the spot that you want it to be? Well, let me show you a little tip. First is, on the shutter button, you want to be able to get comfortable pushing that halfway down. That's called the tap out. When you hear me say the word tap out, that means that no matter what mode you're in, say play mode, when you're going to press the shutter button halfway down, that's a tap out. Why is that important? That's how we're going to focus. Say we want to focus on the black patch, we're going to tap the black patch. Well, what do you know? There's the black patch. Say we want to see the entire black patch. Well, the beautiful part about GH3 is we can go ahead and move that. Now, once you get in the habit of working off the external monitor, you're just going to look over on the monitor and use your hands on the camera. Hey, it's me. I wanted to interrupt right here. I know this is a commercial product shoot, and many of you are not commercial photographers. You're thinking, Will, why do I want to learn all this? Hang on a second. This is just my way of demonstrating to you some of the more advanced features and how I use them to solve my problems. But you will notice that small little HD monitor on that tabletop is a big, big moneymaker and time saver for us because we really can see exact exposure, color, contrast, but more importantly, where that focus ends and where it begins. That's extremely important for portrait photographers that want to gain depth of field control. If you're critically shooting portraits, say families or couples, and you want one person to be sharp in focus and then control how far out of focus the other people are, I don't want to see you doing that in post with Photoshop filters. I want to see you do it in the camera because it's easier, faster, better, and that's part of the whole pre-processing movement. So, portrait shooters, don't think all this stuff is hogwash. And you don't have to buy a $1,500 LED monitor there. You can use a television, but keep it in front of you when you're shooting and don't let your subject see it, right? Don't put it off to the side. Do like I do if you're going to have one that's with you, right? That you're going to be using for critical adjustments, and put it in front of you so your subjects can't see it. In the studio, I mean, if you're just shooting something besides people, you can put it behind you like we do, but plenty of portrait photographers are taking advantage of the HDMI port to make sure that their people shots look spectacular. Now I know I got my color all set and I want to bring this shot back into play. I'm going to move back over this way. I also can see my frame if I want to here, no problem. And by the way, when I get a little creative and we want to change our aspect ratios like I do a lot, you'll notice you're not going to be able to. It's going to be grayed out on the monitor. Don't freak out. That's because you're plugged in with the cable. If the cable wasn't in, you'd be able to change that no problem. Hey, did you notice the one thing we didn't talk about when we're talking about screens? The screen on the back of the camera. That's right. For judging basic exposure, basic color, the screen that's on the back of the GH3 is really pretty good. If you're the type of photographer that has problems with your white balance and you have to shoot raw because your exposure and your color's all over the place, particularly with the GH3, it's probably because you're paying too much attention to the screen. How about you pay more attention to the room environments and your pre-processing settings so that you can avoid all that post-processing. The best part about the screen on the GH3 is its touch screen. The worst part about the GH3 is it's not as color accurate as it really could be. So there you have it. The HDMI port allows you to speedily shoot through the job that you want to with the confidence that you know you're correct. Now I know that some of these screens are pretty expensive little toys, but the money they save and the dollars that they preserve for us are well worth the price. Even if you can't afford something like a small HD monitor, pretty expensive stuff, get yourself a good, simple television monitor that's also an HD monitor. Make sure it's 16:9, right? And its aspect ratio, no 4:3 stuff. Then go ahead and use that. That's a lot better than nothing. Trying to neutralize a cheap TV, not gonna work out. But as long as it's got an HDMI port and you're able to keep it in that standard or sRGB color settings, you'd be surprised how accurate they'll be. If nothing else, even if you do have kind of lousy color and you can't adjust your exposure on your cheapy TV, you can certainly check your focus. One of the areas with the GH3 that's a little troublesome is seeing the exact depth of field. Best way to do it is to go ahead and take a picture, hit the play button, pop it up on the screen, and you're able to zoom in and out of it with the thumb wheel. These are all things that you're going to get used to as being normal once you move over to the GH3. These are also things that photographers they say they don't like about the GH3 when they pick it up for the first 10 minutes. Don't forget, when you turn your buddies on to what the GH3 is, make sure the first thing you tell them is, when you hand them the camera, don't think of what this camera is not. Think what this camera is. The only thing more powerful as a tool, a super feature on the GH3 than the HDMI port is Wi-Fi feature. For pre-processing and setup in this segment, we're going to use the scenery mode, and then we're going to customize it by giving it a +2 in color. Our dynamic range is set to high, and our eye resolution is set to off. So if you want to try it at home, please do. This is a typical rig for us for shooting outdoor hybrid. No matter if we're just shooting photo or just shooting video or video and photo, we want to have control over the image, what the image looks like at the time we record it, it, as well as the audio. Let me give you a quick top to bottom on what's going on here. GH3 mounted with the 35 to 100 f2.8 lens. When it's on a tripod, of course, we have the image stabilization turned off. This tripod happens to be one of the Mi Photo tripods because it folds up super small and fits into a camera case beautifully. Next, you'll see on the side here, that's the small HD brand 7-inch OLED monitor. And it's connected via HDMI to mini HDMI, and it does not interfere with the processing of the camera. So it allows us to see what we want. Now, we're in the shade here. If we were in the sun, or if the surroundings were a little brighter, we'd actually snap on a hood to that monitor. Allow us to look exactly at this beautiful screen to see what's in focus, where our highlights are, where our shadow is, and what our white balance values are. Perfect way to adjust your video to dial it in for perfection, right? Next, we're going to manage our audio in a different way. The first thing we'll have, of course, I like to do goofy microphone, right? This is a lavalier microphone, what we call Little Louie. This looks just like my photo assistant, right? So it goes under my shirt into a transmitter. The transmitter comes over here to a receiver. That receiver then goes into a mixer. This is a brand that I'm okay on. It's called Asden. It's very affordable. It's not really making me super comfortable because I don't think it's as heavy duty as I want it to be. Well, it has 2 channels. That means 2 inputs, and allows me to have 1 output that goes to the camera. So I've got my lavalier microphone going into 1 channel on this mixer, and I've got a knob on the front here that allows me to adjust that volume that I'm going to send to the camera. Well, then we also use a shotgun mic. We want to have a mic that we can reach out for people that aren't going to wear a lavalier microphone. Like when we shoot our business e-cards, executive men really don't have a problem with a lav like this, but executive women do. They have to go to the girls' room to put it on. It's a little bit of a drag, right? Takes too much time. So this mixer allows us to balance between the shotgun mic, the directional mic, and we can also use the Panasonic shotgun mic that pops on the top. We can actually run that through our mixer and blend it with a little bit of the lavalier microphone. So our audio system is pretty solid. It's very simple, and you'll see it's connected on a Camtrol Prime. Now, this is typically a grip that's used the other way around to glide your camera through a shot, and of course we do that as well, but we like to have tools in the Crockett universe that are good for more than just one thing. So we take our Camtrol, flip it upside down, mount it onto the leg of this tripod, and that acts as a perfect little shelf to put our mixer as well as a small little ball head that allows us to adjust the screen where we want. And finally, on the bottom of the front leg, you'll see that is a Quantum Battery 8. That's the power cell that Quantum makes for their Omicron OM4 LED ring light that we adore. So this is the typical rig you'll see us shooting big jobs and small jobs on for our GH3. This segment uses 2 cameras at 2 different settings. Now, we don't use this technique very often, but sometimes on a piece of video, it really helps to bring a point forward. So first camera is set to portrait mode with a little kick up of color saturation on a +1. Dynamic range is all the way up to the top. The eye resolution is all the way down. Camera 2, black and white mode, as you can see. It is in just the standard video shooting mode, right, movie mode, in the monochrome setting. We're not using the dynamic monochrome over in the art filter section. This has also got the same dynamic range and the same eye resolution settings, and no other trimmings and pre-processing done to it. Well, why do we want to set up a segment like this? Well, I want to show you the impact of one of the super features built into the GH3, and that is one that pros commonly mistake as a toy. That seems to be coming back as a recurring theme in this video, doesn't it? Well, the art mode, the scene filter mode. There's a handful of different modes inside the camera that allow you to change how the camera perceives color. Let's take a look. First up, you'll notice that when you want to have big punchy colors, of course, you can just take a photo like this and you can go to the vivid mode instead of the standard mode, and you'll see that you're going to get an increase in color saturation. Great. Well, what happens when you flip it over to one of the special modes? You'll notice that when you flip over to that little artist's palette up on the top there, that does indicate to a pro that that's going to be a gimmicky thing, right? Well, it's not. It does have a couple of holdbacks when it comes to video, but when you use things like toy camera mode, and you've got the dynamic black and white, there's a high key setting, there's a low key setting, And I gotta tell you, the one that I seem to use probably the most out of those is called Expressive. Now, when you use these settings, you're not only just changing the color and contrast, you're changing a lot of different settings inside the GH3. It's automatically jumping into its deep, deep, deep table of, well, tricks up its sleeve of controlling the dynamic range, the contrast curve, how it's all perceived. And for still photo, you're in pretty good shape. You don't have a lot of input when you use the GH3 in this particular mode. You pretty much will allow the exposure compensation, and that's about it. It's going to pick white balance, and it's going to manually override any sort of exposure information that you have in there, with some exceptions, of course. Now, when you hit the video button, you're going to have to realize real quick that you will get a good-looking piece of video as long as you've got standard lighting conditions. When you're going to use this art mode and you have low light conditions, you're going to run into big problems. It's going to have a little bit of a longer shutter speed, and it's going to get into some problems when it comes to its color values. So heads up there. Next, as long as we're on that particular topic, do you know that the GH3 does something that most video cameras don't do? It's going to allow you to overlap your exposure times on top of your frame rate. Hold on. There's a lot of people that love to assign rules, right? And one of the rules that I just look at and think it's ridiculous is you have to set your shutter speed to twice your frame rate. What? So if I'm shooting a video camera with a frame rate of 30 frames a second, then my shutter speed has to be 1/60th of a second? Baloney. No, it doesn't. It can be whatever you want to be. Now, ideally, does that give you the best starting point? It sure does. Is it a rock-solid rule? Oh, heavens no. That's just mumbo-jumbo. One of the things that the Lumix GH3 does that's a built-in super feature that's actually never been released outside of maybe some of the things that we do in Crockettville is, do you know that if you shoot with a frame rate of 30 frames a second, that means it's taking 30 pictures every second, right? JPEGs, and then sticking them all together. Well, when you take your shutter speed and you match it at 1/30th of a second, you can imagine it's working in a 1-to-1 relationship, right? It's taking 30 video pictures at 1/30th of a second, you're good to go. Well, what happens when you drop the shutter speed to a longer setting? What happens when it's a 15th of a second? That means it's twice as long as it needs to be, right? Well, you think it would just clip it off, right? Or do every other frame. It's not true. The GH3 does an incredibly complicated job of overlapping that 15th of a second exposure and blending those together. It is a marvelous piece of technology that allows us to do things we never could before. On that topic of shooting video with a long shutter speed, be careful when you got things moving. If you're just shooting things that don't move or move only a little bit, you can get away with that longer shutter speed. If you want the effect of that kind of ghosty thing, yeah, go ahead and use it too. But don't be afraid on your GH3 to take over the manual shutter speed control and put it anywhere you want it. Forget any of those rules. Well, how was that for a boatload of information, huh? Well, you can tell that I'm very comfortable with those cameras, and we shoot them pretty much every day. I do go back and forth between my Lumix GHs and my Fuji X series. They're two very different cameras for very different jobs, and they do have very different results.